point I wanted to bring. God is on the move when his people are on the move. Amen. We learn, I'm in seminary, and I'm still learning at my age. And Ronnie was talking about all the classes and services we have. Forget about the food part, but the rest of the classes. And we keep bringing more knowledge into us. But what pleases God is when that goes here and here as we move, as we serve one another. That's what pleases God. And I want to see us move into the field and move with our lives, not just our lips, as we continue to serve God. And that's a great thing that you all did. And it has a little bit to do with my message. Because we're going to talk about giving. That's a sore subject sometimes, isn't it? There are some people who won't go to church because they say all the pastor does is speak about money. I haven't spoken about money, and I've been here a whole 7 weeks. Haven't spoken about money yet. But it's not just money. It's about giving, and it's about our heart. And I want us to look at this morning. Our text will mainly come from Matthew 6, the Sermon on the Mount, just a few verses. But some years ago, a study was done by an agricultural school in Iowa, and it reported that production of 100 bushels of corn from 1 acre of land required the following. It required 6,800 pounds of oxygen, 5,200 pounds of carbon, 160 pounds of nitrogen, 125 pounds of potassium, 75 pounds of yellow sulfur, and on top of that, it takes 500,000 gallons of water, 500,000 gallons of water for 1 acre to produce 100 bushels of corn. Now, if we have a good year, it comes in the form of rain. If we have a bad year, it comes in the form of rain. Because if it doesn't come in the form of the rain coming down, it comes in the form of the rain coming previously into the rivers and the ponds and the irrigation then taking care of it. But then it also needs the sunshine. So what he's trying to say here really is although many hours of the farmer's labor are also needed, it's estimated that only 5% of the produce of a farm can be attributed to the efforts of man. So therefore, about 95% of what happened there all came from God. And of course, even the 5% really came from him, didn't it? It can also be said, the same can also be said of our spiritual lives. Very little depends on us. It all depends on what God has done for us. To the Jew, everything from the earth came from God. It's their part of theology of creation. The Israelite farmers routinely confessed the same, not least in prayers like we will see in Psalm 65. And I think we have that up here, and it's in your bulletin. And I purposefully left 11 blanks for you to fill out. Now, it's not going to be hard because 9 of those blanks would be one pronoun, and the other 2 another pronoun. But I want you to write them in. I want you to fill them in. Because that's where the emphasis is. You visit the earth and water it. Of course, speaking of God. You ought to be able to know how to spell that by now. Greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide the grain, for you have prepared it. Guess who? You. Water its ridges abundantly. You settle its furrows. You make it soft with showers, and you bless its growth. You crown the year with your goodness, and your paths drip with abundance. Today I do want to speak about giving. Nothing we do really happens without money, does it? It's kind of sad to say, but it takes money. It takes money. And by the way, we're going to be talking about putting a face with every dollar. I've been to some of these places where this money is going. Some of you have. I remember this young lady in the Dominican Republic that kids were mean to her. She was probably in her 20s. They were throwing rocks at her in this little village because they said she was off a little bit. And we followed her to her house to try to talk to her, even though she didn't speak English. I think we had a translator because we wanted to follow her and make sure she's okay. She was being mistreated. So she ran to her house. We went into her house. You know what her house looked like? It consisted of about a 15 by 15 building with dirt floors, a little cot, and a table. I don't know her name. I wish I did. It's been many years. But her face still resonates with me today. You know, we think about giving. Sometimes we reluctantly give, don't we? It's like, I think you guys, by the way, are great. Now, I want to give you a hand, and you can give yourself one. Because you are a giving church, amen? I mean, I think these baby bottles will be filled. We're adopting a boy, a 13-year-old boy in China that his dad died, and he's helping supply the needs of his family. We give to the alabaster box, and this offering doesn't go to any kind of anything administratively. It doesn't go to people. It goes just to buying buildings, material for buildings and land, so that other people can be somewhere and worship God in a place. I remember one year going to the Dominican Republic, and we went into the village right there in the cane field to visit some of the people before we had service that Sunday morning. And they had huts, and they had a fire in the middle of their hut, some of them, with the smoke, some of it not going out through the hole in the top, and there would be pigs running through the house and through the street, and the kids had a barrel ring and a stick. That was their toys that they'd play with, or they would have some other little make-believe games. As we left that week, I took my work boots off because I was finished with them for that week and tossed them off the back of the truck, and it was probably the best pair of shoes some man my size ever wore. But I say that to say that we went in this cinder block building at 10:30 that morning. We went in the cinder block building, and you could see where an electrician had run some wires, but there were no lights. There was no glass in the holes in the walls. There were windows for air to come through, and the pews were somewhat like these altars. They were about 2x8s or 2x10s on metal poles, no backs. The men and the children, or the men and the older boys sat over here. The ladies and the children sat over here. And here I am, kind of ignorant. I'm there because I'm speaking that morning with a white shirt and a yellow tie. Why I dressed up for that, to be in a 90-degree temperature out in the cane field, I don't know. I guess I thought I was important or something, made me look good. But I remember as we stood to sing, those people who had nothing stood, and they were on their feet, probably somewhat like you saw Friday night. In this little church, they had their hands lifted to heaven. They didn't care. They were praising God so much that I cried. It's like it just touched me. And I cried so hard, my nose started bleeding. And it went right down on my yellow tie. Probably a good thing for me, right? Probably taught me right. Why would I wear a yellow tie out in the cane field anyhow? But it was such a blessing. Those people were so blessed. And we need to put a name with the dollars that we give, because those are God's people that would not have anything like we have. I remember when we first got married, my wife and I lived in an apartment, basement apartment off campus at Eastern Mennonite College in Harrisonburg, because my wife was finishing up her senior year of college. We got married the year before she graduated. And I remember that after 1 year, when she graduated, we bought a house and we moved from Harrisonburg to Verona. And everything that we had fit in the bed of a pickup. And I was thinking, how do people have so much stuff? We have enough stuff to fit in the back of a pickup. I said, we'll never have all the stuff a lot of people have, where they get these big moving vans and move all this stuff. Well, guess what? It came. And then a few years later, we sold a house, and I took 5 pickup loads just to the dump. What do we need with all that stuff? Someday, it's going to rust. I don't know where I am. But I want to talk about giving. Nothing can happen without money, but I really want to talk about having a generous heart, about our outlook, about our view, our perspective, and next Sunday about our attitude or our lordship in all of this. The vehicle that carries almost all of what I want to speak about still involves money somehow, so I've made the circle. But Jesus says this, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there's where your heart's going to be. We bought a 1984 Olds Cutlass Supreme in 1984. Brand new. Don't do that too often. But I was young and thought that it would be okay to buy a brand new car. And I did, and I loved it. I mean, it was a family car. We were getting ready to, my wife was pregnant with her first child, and I thought, sports cars are gone. We'll get a family car. It was nice. It was luxurious. In 1984, it was beautiful. I loved it. I would wash it and wax it and vacuum it every couple of days. It started getting to be more like every couple of weeks and then every couple of months and then every couple of years. But you know what I mean. It was beautiful. It had a good sound system. I popped that cassette tape in. We had converted from 8-track to cassette. And the sound around us was beautiful, and that thing just floated down the road. And I think about this every time I read the scripture. That was my baby. I loved that car. I would always love that car. Well, I saw it about 10 years after we bought it, and someone else had bought it. It was putting down the road, and smoke was coming out of the tailpipes, and it was rusted. It didn't look very good anymore. But that's what's going to happen to everything that we have. Someday it will be gone, burned in a fervent heat, or rusted and corroded. Those things are necessary. They're needed to some degree, but that's not where our heart should be, is it? It's where our treasure is where our heart will be. And we do much better when we put a face to each dollar. Often we think of giving or hear about a plea to give in the church, and we link it to a spiritual idea. And certainly we know that Scripture speaks to this concept often. In fact, Jesus speaks much about the wisdom and use of money. Also, the concept and practice of giving is more than just spiritual. It's a great concept for helping us in all of life, in all of ways. It's good for our health. Did you know that? According to the November 15, 2016 issue of Mental Health, and here's the title, Want to Give? Question mark. This is your brain on a helper's high. And studies document how giving affects our body. Scott B. says, we all know giving helps others, whether we volunteer for organizations, offer emotional support to those around us, or whether we donate to charities. But studies show that giving is not only good for the giver. Studies show that giving is also good for us. We know it's good for people we give to, but it's good for us. It boosts our physical and our mental health. Studies also find that health benefits associated with giving are these things: lower blood pressure. Who doesn't want that? Increased self-esteem. We could all use, or I could use that. Less depression, lower stress levels, longer life, and greater happiness. These are things that happen to people who give. Even though we are focusing on financial giving, the same can be said about other things, because not everyone can give financially. We know there are people who cannot give. They have absolutely nothing to give financially. But guess what? You're not off the hook. Because if you can't give financially, there's something else you can do to give. There are other ways to give besides the money. The author of the article that I read, he recalls giving his daughters each $1 to buy a gift for a holiday in elementary school. And when they returned home, they could not wait for the holiday to give that gift. They insisted that we open it immediately. They could not be much more patient because they wanted the parents to open their gifts. Their brains were about to experience the delight of gift giving. I remember as a child, I used to give everyone something at Christmas. Of course, I bought it Christmas Eve, typical for us men, most of us. And I remember buying my oldest brother a little 6-foot tape. Plastic, you pull it out, you push a button, it springs back. You know what I mean? I was more excited about it than he was. But I couldn't wait to give it to him. It probably cost 50 cents back then. But you know what I'm talking about, right? Sometimes you just can't wait to give something. It creates a high, some kind of brain high for us when we give. According to a study published in the International Journal of Psychophysiology, people who gave social support to others had, as we said earlier, lower blood pressure than people who didn't. It even helps people with heart disease. Researchers also found that people who gave their time to help others through community and the organizational involvement had greater self-esteem, less depression, lower blood pressure, and lower stress levels, as we said. And then we tend to live longer. These are great things. Also, it gives us happiness. Biologically, giving can create a warm glow, activating regions in the brain associated with pleasure, connection with other people, and trust. There's evidence that during gift-giving behaviors, humans secrete serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, and chemicals that truly, of course, make us happier. When researchers from the National Institute of Health looked at the functional MRIs of subjects who gave to various charities, they found that giving stimulates the mesolimbic pathway, which is the reward center to the brain. It comes up from our spinal cord and goes into our brain, and it crosses over, and it rewards us. As we give, we're rewarding, and it gives us a helper's high. And just like any other helper's high, any other kind of high, the more we give, the more addictive it is. So I've said this about myself for years, because it's not that I haven't wanted to give more in times past. Sometimes I just felt strapped, like I couldn't. So I decided what I was going to do was begin giving something somewhere as often as I could, even if it's small. Right now I have no cash. I felt bad this morning because we want to take up some money for you, the Chinese boy, not you, Gabe, but you, in China. His name is you. Man, it's right there. So I decided that, like, when I go through a place that maybe Starbucks or something, they have a tip jar. I said, I'm going to start trying to give something, even if it's ashamedly just, I put my hand so they don't see, if all I have is a dime. But to get into the habit of giving. Begin to give. The more you give, the more you want to give. It becomes addictive. Do you think this is incidental, or do you think the Creator happened to design us for this? The healthiest people and the healthiest businesses engage constantly in giving. They give back. They give to others, to people and organizations that are needy. And it's like the concept of a pond or a lake. I love the fresh ponds, the fresh lakes, where a little stream or a spring will feed the lake. And then on the other end of the lake, there's a little outlet, and the water flows through. That's good. It's healthy. But in Israel, there is something called, you know what it is? It's the Dead Sea, where the water goes in and it doesn't go out. The only way any water goes out is whatever reflects up. And so nothing lives in there, and it's dead. And that's what happens to us when we consume but don't give. We become useless and like the Dead Sea. It's sad that much of the church is so stingy in giving today. There really is no wonder that the church in the modern world is so anemic in many ways. Listen to this. A well-worn $1 bill and a similarly distressed $20 bill arrive at the Federal Reserve System or bank to be retired. They do that every so many years. Retire the old money. And as they move along the conveyor about to be burned, they strike up a conversation. The 20 reminisces about its travels all over the country. I've had a pretty good life, it says. I've been to Las Vegas, Atlantic City, performances on Broadway, the best restaurants in New York, even a cruise on the Caribbean. Wow, says the $1 bill. You've really had an exciting life. So tell me, says the 20 to the $1 bill, where have you been throughout your lifetime? And here's what the $1 bill says. I've been to the Christian church, the Methodist church, the Baptist church. And then the $20 bill interrupts. He says, what's a church? It's funny, but it's sad, isn't it? We have all kinds of pockets for entertainment. But when it comes to giving to help people, it's kind of the $1 bill, isn't it? Now listen to this. If we, the church, and I'm talking about the church in general, all over, if we gave 10% of our income, if every Christian who claims to be a Christian gave 10% of their income, here's what would happen in our country. $25 billion, all over the world. We would take in $165 billion per year if every Christian tied 10%. $165 billion, that's a pretty good chunk of change. $25 billion could relieve global hunger and eliminate deaths from preventable diseases within 5 years. $15 billion could solve the world's water and sanitation issues, specifically in places where a majority of people live on less than $1 a day. $12 billion could end illiteracy. $1 billion could fully fund all overseas mission work. The point here is that Jesus endorses tithing. $100 to $110 billion would be left over for additional ministry expansion. So our text today speaks of the trait of the treasure, or the location of it. And as we speak to the transfer of our treasure, our transfer from this life, the things we hold on, to the life to come, or to the things that live forever, we will delve deeply into the attitude of the why that's behind the concept that we are called to give. And John Piper gives 7 different reasons we should tithe. And I'm going to list them and read a little bit about each one of them. The first one is it is honoring an Old Testament principle. As we give, as we tithe, if you recall, the Old Testament, God designated one of the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Levi, to be to have the ministry and the tabernacle of the temple work. So instead of giving the tribe of Levi a portion of the land like the other 11 tribes got, they were taken care of by the tithe of the other 11. Numbers 18 says, you shall have no inheritance in their land, nor any portion among them. I am your portion. Let me say that again. God says, I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons of Israel. And so to the sons of Levi, he says, behold, I have given all of the tithe in Israel for an abundance. And in return for their service, which they perform, the service of the tent of meeting. And then in Matthew 23, some would say, well, it's different in the New Testament. In fact, if you really want to look at what the New Testament says for giving versus what the Old Testament says, the Old Testament says 10%. The New Testament is you give your all. It's more an attitude of don't stop at 10. So if someone wants to say, well, that's an Old Testament law, we don't have to give 10%. No, you can give 20, you can give whatever you want. Jesus says to this, listen to this in Matthew 23:23, woe, shame on you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you do tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, which are justice, mercy, and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done. He's not condemning part of this. He says, but without neglecting the others. In other words, you still give of your finances, even when you're taking care of the issues of justice and mercy. So the point here is Jesus endorses tithing, so don't neglect it. Number 2, we honor the Creator as the owner of it all. You've heard the saying, He owns. I should get Wilford to sing this for us. He owns the cattle on the 1,000 hills. You want to sing it? We're familiar with that song, though, right? We used to sing it years ago. He does own the cattle on the 1,000 hills, but guess what else? He owns the hills under the cattle. He owns it all, everything we have. There have been so many times, and I'm reminded of a story, a little joke about a little boy. There are so many times that we think we can't give because we think we did something. We have nothing. We don't have our jobs. We don't have our health. We have absolutely nothing unless God gives it to us. So there was a little boy, came up to a candy counter. Remember the old country stores that had the candy counter, and you could look in behind the glass, and you could see some of us remember penny candy. You could see the jars of penny candy, and this little boy was standing there. His mouth was watering. You know what he wanted? He wanted the candy, but he had no money. So a businessman was standing there observing what he was doing, and he said to the clerk, he said, get a bag and put a little bit of each of the candy in the bag and give it to him. And so the clerk did, and he put it in the bag and he handed it to the boy, and the boy grabbed that bag and clung onto it. He was so happy to have the candy. Well, the businessman thought, well, maybe he'd give me a piece. So the businessman asked him, said, can I have one piece? And he just hung on to it all tighter and shook his head no. The man who had given it to him couldn't have any of it. The boy wouldn't have had anything without him. We have nothing without God, but don't we sometimes do that? We cling so tightly to things that are going to rust or corrode or not be good for us. So we honor the creator of God. The earth is the Lord's, the creator of all things. The earth is the Lord and all it contains, the world and us who dwell in it. And then number 3, it's an antidote to covetousness. The last of the commandments says, you shall not covet. Jesus said in Luke 12:15, beware and be on guard against every form of covetousness or greed. And in Colossians 3:5, Paul calls covetousness idolatry. Where's that word idolatry come in? It comes in the 10 Commandments too, doesn't it? Anything that we serve that comes between us and God, wanting things too much is incredibly dangerous for your soul. Let me say that again. Wanting things too much is incredibly dangerous for your soul. Let your character be free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. Number 4, it puts a governor on ever-expanding spending. And I've said this before, but I didn't word it like this author did, and I love this. There's an idiom, and here's what it would state. Expenses almost inevitably expand to fill the income. I remember when we had a huge house payment. When we moved to Roanoke, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have gotten the house we got, and it was in my years of not having much knowledge and good sense. I'm glad I've reformed, but we had a huge house payment. I was working full-time. My wife was working part-time, and we kind of squeezed by each week. Well, eventually she went to work full-time, which increased our income. And I thought, we're going to have extra money. No. Because here's what happens. If you're not extremely cautious, if you're not extremely diligent, your expenses almost inevitably expand to fill your income. Because there's a vacuum. I have more money. I have more money. Now, John Wesley, we're familiar with John Wesley. He started off making a meager income. He had a certain amount of expenses. A few years later, his income expanded greatly, but he kept his expenses where they were. Eventually, he was making a whole lot of money compared to what he was, but he kept his expenses here because he says he knows what would happen if he expands what he's spending, because it always takes up everything we have, and then we have nothing to give. We're not called to consume it all. So it puts a governor on ever-expanding spending. And then number 5, God's way of bringing about good deeds. He who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, right? He who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Now, we don't give to get, but there is something about that when we give from our hearts, when we say, Lord, I just want to be used of you. Whatever you do for me, it's okay. I just want to be obedient. I want to put a face on each dollar. I want to give. And you know, when you do that, God honors that somehow, some way, in his way. Don't look for it to work a certain way. Just trust him. So he who sows sparingly reaps sparingly, and he who sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully. And then God's way of providing for you is number 6. Giving is a way of having what you need. Giving in a regular, disciplined, generous way up to and beyond the tithe is simply good sense in view of the promises of God. He who sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully, and God is able to make all grace abound to you for all sufficiency. He will supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory. And then we're familiar with Malachi 3, Malachi chapter 3. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Again, as I've said so many times, there's a reason we always are followed. We have a reason that follows the mandate. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. If God just said that and stopped, what would we do? We would probably say, why? Remember how we used to say, why? And Daddy would say, because I said so. That's probably not good enough reason. But why do we bring in the whole tithe into the storehouse? So that, here's what the prophet says, so that there may be food, God speaking through him, so that there may be food in my house. And then he says this, and test me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open up for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. I love that word picture. It's like, I like chicken pot pie from Cheddar's. Y'all have a Cheddar's somewhere? Beckley. Oh, that's a long ways. I was kind of hinting. I'm feeling like a good chicken pot pie. But I love the ones at Cheddar's. And you know why I love them? Well, I love them because they're good, but also they're not skimpy. The little thing that comes in, it's overflowing. The crust is just almost falling down to the bottom. It's overflowing. I love that word. And when you get something, you don't want it to be meager. You want it to overflow. And that's what God is saying. If you will trust me in this, I will open up the heavens and I will pour out blessings not until it levels off, but until it overflows. It's an amazing challenge from God. Test me, he says. You think you can't afford this? You think you can't afford to tithe? And some people would say you can't afford not to. You think you cannot afford to tithe? He says, test me. And what we will find when we test him is that we cannot afford to tithe, and it's a safe way to handle our money, because Jesus said in Luke 6:38, give, and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, they will pour into your lap. I love those pictures that God gives us. It's not like you give me and I'll give you back. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Whatever you give, I'll give it back to you. And again, he doesn't always give back in the same measure. In fact, he doesn't give back in the same measure, because everything we read about, he gives beyond. Shaken down. On the dairy farm, we used to put silage in bags. My brother and I would shovel it up and put it in burlap sacks for my dad to put up on his shoulder and carry out into the troughs out in the barnyard and pour it out for the cattle to eat. And my brother and I were upset with him one time. So you know what we did? Oh, well, here's why we were upset. He said, you got to put more in that. And you could hear him in his farmer voice. You got to put more in that bag. You're not putting enough in. We thought, we'll get him. So we put some in and we shook it down. When he wasn't looking, we stomped it down. We put some more in, we shook it down, we stomped it down. And then one time he went to pick one up, thought it was don't do this at home, kids. This is not good. I repented of this. But he went to pick it up thinking it was going to be the same light sack, and then wonder it didn't send him to the chiropractor. It was heavy. But it was shaken down. It was pressed. And that's the way God wants to give to us. He wants to bless us. And trust me, he will meet your needs. He will bless you in ways beyond measure if you're just obedient to him, whatever that looks like. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and I realize that life is slipping by. And I think the older we get, the more we realize everything here doesn't matter as much as we once thought it did. Heaven gets sweeter. And you know when it gets sweeter? It's when we start putting faces on what we give. As we start doing, as we start giving. Because when we're giving to God. We're giving to people who are precious in his sight, people he loves. He gave us all kinds of people around us to see how we would respond. Sometimes they're poor financially. Sometimes it's just that we give to them, even if they have all the things they need. There's something about the concept of giving that speaks volumes to people because it brings God out. And that's what we're called to do, to give of what we have because it's good for us. It's good for whoever we give to, and it brings glory to God. I don't know how you want to respond to this morning, but we're going to be talking about this a little bit for a while. I plan on having some slides and maybe some inserts that keep this in front of us. I would like to get this into our small groups some. And next Sunday, we're still going to talk about giving, but more about why we give and about the lordship of it all. Because if we get the heart right, everything else will follow, right?